Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander. Today, we are having a congressional candidate for Virginia's 7th Congressional District. His name is Jason Alexander. Hello, Jason. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I'm running for Congress in Virginia's 7th Congressional District. It's Jason Alexander Roberge, or Roberge, however you want to pronounce it. My background is is as a little business owner. I went to college for business, and I went to law school, and haven't practiced law really a little bit before I left law school, and worked on a Supreme Court brief to help defeat Obamacare, which is extremely good, and Obamacare is extremely bad. So we started to dismantle it with one of the cases I worked on, which was excellent. And I'm just out here trying to fight for everyone's freedoms, their individual liberties. We have a huge gun battle going on here right now, not literally, but in the state legislature, they're trying to ban assault weapons and the red flag laws and all that terrible stuff. So real quick, my website is robergeforcongress.com, and then Twitter, Jason Roberge VA is the handle. So
Right. So that's great to hear that you're fighting against that. So why did you choose to run as a Republican?
Sure. Well, so I've always identified as a Republican, actually, since a really young age. And I remember in middle school, they had these surveys they handed out, and I had pretty neutral teachers from what I remember. Nowadays, it's pretty much biased teachers, is from what I hear all the time. But so our teachers handed out these surveys, and it was like, you would like, how do you feel about such and such an issue? And then it would give you a score at the end. I always remember this. And I would always score high on sort of the Republican side or conservative values, and it would give you kind of an idea where you fell on the political spectrum. So it's a no-brainer. This is an easy thing because I'm running on my core values, my beliefs, and it represents the folks in the district here. And I'm excited to do it. It's a great opportunity, and I think we need more Washington outsiders to really come in and fight for everyone who doesn't have a voice, honestly, in the country.
The reason why I ask that is because I see the Republican Party increasingly becoming more like the Democrat Communist Party. We see that with them supporting open borders and gun legislation banning various guns. So I see that you are against red flag laws and that. So you're against red flag laws, correct?
Yeah, I'm against red flag laws for a few main core reasons. So the notion of red flag laws, it's a good idea from the perspective of if you're trying to prevent people that are criminals from killing other people, right? So the idea generally sounds like it's good. You say, oh, well, we can take away people's guns, and then that way they won't kill anyone. That's the broad sort of argument the Democrats have. But really what red flag laws do is they infringe on law-abiding gun owners' rights. That's what they do. And it's really sad. Shall not be infringed is pretty clear in the Second Amendment. So we have these law enforcement people with the red flag laws that can go in and take people's guns with no hearing. You should be allowed to have a hearing on these things, and they can come in without a hearing and do that, right? So there's no procedural due process in place, and it really deprives people of their rights. And I think that that's wrong. I would never vote for red flag laws the way they're put forward. Broadly, it's just I would never vote for them. So,
as a congressman, would you vote to get rid of red flag gun laws?
If there were any on the books, yeah. I'm actually calling for a full review of all of the legislation that's been passed that infringes on the Second Amendment, as well as a review of all the Supreme Court decisions that have affected gun ownership. You have these crazy laws that they get through, and then you'll have a Supreme Court split where it's a political decision. Really, the court has in the past decided on certain things, but really it's a shall not be infringed is pretty clear. But they've restricted some of the rights through court decisions, not just on the Supreme Court level, but circuit court level and other lower courts also. So I am personally calling on a review of all of these these laws, and I would not support anything that infringes on the Second Amendment.
So you want to make the American people sovereign again as a Congress member and try to get rid of all these permits and fees that are required to get a weapon? Would you work to get rid of those as a congressman?
Yeah, I think that, so the assault weapons ban, or whatever they call it, like the full-blown, fully automatic assault weapons ban that they have in place, in order to actually get a federal license to own these I say assault weapons in a sense that that's what they've named it, right? I don't actually believe that that's what they are, right? A weapon is a weapon, period. That's just sort of giving it some sort of a nickname. But no, so to get a federal permit to own an actual fully automatic weapon, which almost no one has, only dealers typically get them, and then some people, it's extremely expensive, thousands and thousands of dollars. You have to wait for a year or two or whatever the time is, and then you might be able to get it. And so I think that that's completely ridiculous. That law infringes on the Second Amendment rights, and I think that should be overturned. That law, there should be new legislation to pull that legislation back.
So why do you believe Donald Trump has been supporting red flag laws and been pandering to the Democrats? Why do you think he's doing that among other people in the Senate and the Congress?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't think he's against Second Amendment rights, but I think that he's willing to actually look at the options, right? He's an options guy and he's an ideas guy. So he wants to look and see what's on the table. The same exact reason why he'll meet with the leader of North Korea, the leader of the Taliban, the ISIS people, whatever. Same thing. He wants to see what's on the table. I don't think he's actually a strong proponent of pushing through any red flag laws. And I do realize that he did do an executive order on the bump stocks, right? And bump stocks are relatively uncommon, and most people don't even know what they are really. But so that was a little surprising. I was a little surprised that he did that. But as far as legislation goes, I don't think he would be a supporter of any red flag laws, because I don't think that they're constitutional, for one, and I don't think they really help also from a public sense. You want to get guns off the streets from criminals that have them, not law-abiding citizens, right? So there you go.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much an oxymoron when they take away the weapons from the honest, good citizens who want to protect their families and themselves, when the criminal can still get that firearm in the black market or wherever, and then they get it. And another thing I've noticed too, also in states like Virginia and California, I've seen that they really give people a hard time, the legal citizens, when they, with the guns and everything. Mm-hmm. But with the people who didn't even try to get the permit or get anything for the guns, they usually get off relatively quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and to answer your question from earlier a little bit, so I said that it's extremely expensive to get fully automatic machine gun license. I don't think that the fees that they have are good at all. I would write legislation to get rid of the fees. If there's a small administrative fee, like $20, $30, okay, I get that, right? But if it's an administrative fee of $300, I don't support that. But maybe a really small administrative fee, because they have to spend time processing the stuff. So I can see that. But for the fully automatic machine gun license, for example, I think the fee is $10,000 or something. It's a very high fee. I forget what it is right now, but it's something like that. So
I think it's a big slippery slope when the federal government starts charging fees on anything. And that's one of the problems that I've been seeing. So I see that your sign right there, I vote pro-life first. So you seem to be a pro-life candidate. What do you think of this late-term abortion legislation that has recently came up in Virginia, and the governor that is aiding and abetting in this?
Sure. So I'm very pro-life. I'm actually the only candidate running in the race calling for a full review, once again, of all of the legislation and all of the Supreme Court decisions that affect our right to life, the unborn children's right to life. So as far as in our state goes, they are trying to pass legislation to allow people to have these extra abortions and all that stuff for, different trimesters and everything. And the governor is called, well, he had an interview, Governor Blackface Northam.
Yeah.
That's his nickname, of course, because, it is what it is. And he had a press conference thing he did, whatever, an interview. And he described, that you can have abortions all the way through until after the child is born. And then the parent can still decide after the child is physically born into the world, whether or not to abort the child. And I mean, it's really sad. I mean, that would fit the definition of murder, of course, if you were to abort the child after it's physically left the body. I mean, if you want to get really specific and really into the weeds here, I think that there should be a review of what constitutes murder as far as third trimester abortions. Could that be considered murder? I mean, that's definitely worth a review, because, you have these viable children that just are simply not born yet, but they have the heartbeat and they're fully formed. And, when you really think about it, if you have a birth that takes place before the 9 months, and if, let's say, the baby has to be born a little bit early for medical complications or something, that's a fully viable child. If they can bring it into the world a month or two early, whatever the case may be, it'll be a lot smaller, of course, because it won't be fully grown and, up to the 9 or 10 pounds. But, these are still children, right? They just happen to not be born yet. So
Right.
It's just crazy to me, so. Yeah, I'm very pro-life. I was at the March for Life rally last month in Washington, D.C., and it was a huge turnout, huge.
So as a congressman, will you stop all federal fundings to abortion clinics?
Yeah, I don't think the federal government should be giving any money for abortion purposes. I think it's crazy. I mean, I do realize, so Planned Parenthood is your primary person or primary organization that receives the funding, but they do have other services also that I think are valuable, but that portion of their services is something we shouldn't be funding. So some of the other services they offer, it's like medical screening, blood screening, that sort of thing. So there's some value there, of course, but as far as the abortion side of things, no, they should get absolutely no funding for that. Yeah.
Well, the problem with the federal funding for any organization is when the federal government starts giving funding to that organization, they get an unfair advantage compared to the other companies. And
Yep.
also that kind of makes these organizations part of the federal government itself. So will you?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely look at it like that. And I think Planned Parenthood specifically announced that they were going to be donating something like $50 million to Democrat candidates in the various states, state seats and federal seats. And it's like, okay, so you guys are going to donate $50 million to Democrat candidates, and yet the federal government is funding you? Like they're just reallocating the federal funds basically to pro-abortion candidates, pro-murder candidates. So
Yeah, it's called
crazy.
lobbying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty unbelievable too, because Margaret Sanger, the person who made Planned Parenthood, was a Democrat, supported the KKK, and also made Planned Parenthood specifically to murder Black babies.
Yeah, it's really sick. The whole premise of the Planned Parenthood from its inception was, for nefarious purposes. They were just basically abortion. It was an abortion clinic, right? And they've of course branched out, like I was saying, and they offer other services too now. But yeah, it's really unfortunate. So
Yeah, it's scary too.
yeah, it is. Yeah, the world we live in today, and it's crazy. Our rights are just getting stripped away from us, and the federal government is telling us, how to live our lives. And I'm sorry, but I think it's up to the states to decide, and the citizens of the states to decide how they want to live their lives, not the federal government to tell us what we can or can't do, and whether or not we can exercise free speech or Second Amendment rights, etc. They're states' rights. They really are. And even more than that, moreover, it's their county rights. They're the individual rights, right?
Well, we also need to start protecting and defending our Constitution, which all states are supposed to adhere to: the right to life, liberty, the Second Amendment. Free
Yep,
speech is a big component to that. So
it
what are
is.
your thoughts on internet censorship?
Yeah, so as far as internet censorship goes, I think that it should be pretty much nothing should be censored, right? And if you're talking about more social media companies, is that what you're talking about a
Yes.
little bit more? Okay, so the social media companies, I think that the thing is, they have they can't be liable for if they're considered, that's that section 230 that we're talking about. Probably there's a section of the code 230 where it's like they can't have any personal liability for um, what people post, but if they just let people post anything, basically is how it works. And then if they start editing and they start actually being, part of the process, and they're screening some things but not other things, and that kind of opens up the door to liability there. And I don't think that they should censor conservative voices over liberal voices or Democrat voices, whatever. I think that they need to stop doing that. Whatever company they're outsourcing their screenings to needs to be reviewed. They need to be regulated, as far as I'm concerned, for bias, really. And they need to go through a process. And I am not for a lot of federal regulations, over regulating everything. But I think that this is such an important thing that I think there needs to be some oversight, unfortunately, because these companies are just blocking people's accounts, and you see these big accounts. I think even, what was it, Donald Trump's? It was either Trump or Trump Jr. His account was blocked for a day or something.
Yeah, it was Donald Trump, the president.
Right. Okay. So yeah, it was his main account, which is crazy. How are they going to be censoring that? And so I think that there needs to be.
They said it was an accident by a rogue Twitter agent, but I think that was completely not true,
That's
honestly.
not true. How can one Twitter agent block an account that has 70 million followers? Right? There's no way. There's no way.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty unbelievable. So, as a congressman, will you make legislation to stop internet censorship?
yeah, I definitely would, and I think that there needs to be accountability for these companies when they actually wrongly censor people. I don't think they should be, if they're in the business of creating a platform that allows people to have a public voice and to express their opinions. I don't think that they should be regulating it, because then it gets into their editing the content and everything. So I think that I would definitely support that legislation. I think there's already a group that's been drafting legislation to have these companies be held accountable for what they're doing. I think the individual should be able to censor, various content as it comes through, and I think that
Yeah.
that's fine, but that's to the individual, right? That's their own discretion. Um, I don't think the company should be doing it. So, yeah.
Will you break up the big tech monopolies?
So we're talking Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, these
Yeah, like
guys.
Twitter. Yep, yep.
Yeah. I don't necessarily know if breaking them up is the right solution. This is a tough question, because it's like we want them to thrive because we want business to thrive, right? Is in a free market. But at the same time, if they're not going to comply with federal law and they're going to do all this censorship stuff, which really infringes on the First Amendment, as far as I'm concerned, I think that I think we've gotten to a time where there's so many people online that it is basically the public forum now. Some of these platforms, and if we need to allow people to have a voice. We can't have these companies censoring people. So I think that I think that we can take a look at that for sure. I know Elizabeth Warren has called to break up the tech companies, which is really interesting, because she's a Democrat candidate, and usually that's not part of their platform. But I think that that's one thing that's good to it's good to look at. I would definitely take a review on that also.
Well, that's good to hear. What are your thoughts on the federal income tax?
Well, so the actual just regular federal income tax of 30 whatever percent it is, depending on your bracket.
Yeah.
I think that it's too high. I mean, I honestly think that the best way to tackle, so we need funding for various federal programs. Some people have said we should do away with federal tax. I don't think that that's a good solution, because then you don't have any money to fund ambassadors and these various actually good federal programs we have, right? Um, I think that a better way to approach the federal income tax is we have to look at all the different administrative agencies to see if there's any waste, fraud, and abuse and all that stuff going on within these different agencies, like, Department of Education or Department of Labor, whatever it is. And we have to try and figure out whether or not we can cut 4%, 6%, 8%, whatever it is of the waste. And by doing that, we won't accrue as much national debt. And that way we'll have a little bit more wiggle room to lessen the federal income tax ultimately. I think that that's a good solution. I don't think we should raise the income tax, obviously. I think that that's pretty, that's a pretty no-brainer sort of an issue there. So
Why do you think the president hasn't acted on internet censorship?
I think we've been tied up in all these other crazy things, like the impeachment hoax and all these World War III, Civil War II. We have all these other bigger picture issues going on, and I think he just kind of hasn't gotten to it yet. And we've had USMCA that was passed, which was really good. We've had all these issues that were passed. I think literally it's just a matter of having the time allocated to be able to tackle the issue. But I think he will. I think it's on the agenda.
So how will you solve the school problem, especially with the public schools? We see declining rates of education in the United States while other countries are soaring in education. What are your thoughts?
So, yeah, it's a very good question. This is a little bit more of a state or county, local level question. But I think what we need to do is we need to look on the county level to see what principals and what superintendents are being hired. And we have to see whether or not they have bias first. There's bias, there's a political bias, that's part of it. But then we also have to look at the quality of teachers. And, you have to, I think you have to pay these teachers enough money. You have to incentivize teachers. There's plenty of teachers out there that would teach if their pay was high enough, that have PhDs and they're, doctoral level teachers. But I think that they just simply aren't incentivized enough to teach, and they're really qualified, right?
Yeah.
So I think pay the teachers a little bit more, while at the same time we make sure that the principals and the superintendents are doing a good job at hiring actually qualified staff. I don't think there's much oversight or accountability for those folks. I think that's the problem.
I think the major problem is that these schools, all they want to do, they want to get the $20,000 per student or whatever the amount of money is. They want to bring them into their school, but then they want to spend as little amount of money as possible. So would you support a school choice bill that would give the students the vouchers directly so they could use that $20,000 or whatever amount that is to go to a school of their choice to make it more competitive?
Yeah, I think that that's actually a good program. I was actually a school choice kid, if you will, when I was in high school. I went to a different high school because it was just a better fit for me. That's simply all it was. And it worked out really well. It was a great school. So yeah, I went to public school, and I think it was a good opportunity for me. And honestly, the other people that did school choice to my school also did really well, and they've done really well. Present day, when you look back, you see from high school to now, they've come a long way, and they've done great things. And that path would have been differently, I think, if they weren't school choice kids. So
I completely agree with that. So
yeah.
I see the drums of war beating in the United States, in the Middle East. It seems that a World War III could happen very soon. So would you consider yourself anti-war or pro-war?
I think broadly speaking, I would be an anti-war person. And I don't mean this in a Democrat hippie sort of way. I just mean it in a sense that if we have these endless wars, I think we should take a really strong look at why are we there. Like, for example, Afghanistan. I was talking to an Army vet the other day who was in Afghanistan for almost his entire career. And it's like, wow, you think that you start your career in the Army and you get out of boot camp and you're in a different country for 20 years and, you go back and forth, but that, that's your whole 20-year block of time. And I just think we have to look at some of these countries and say, like, why are we still there? And I understand a military presence throughout the world. I get that. But I think if we're hand-to-hand combat in certain areas with no goal, why aren't the local police stepping in? Why isn't the military at whatever country's government it is stepping in? So I think we have to look at it more of, how do we train their people and then withdraw? That's kind of important. So yeah.
So basically, I want to ask you, do you believe that the United States went into the Middle East, including Iraq and Afghanistan, to take over the oil wells? Because it seems that big oil is supporting both Democrat and Republican candidates, giving them money, backflowing the money, and then they continue to stay in these Middle Eastern countries. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's probably the reason. I probably would have to agree with you. And the thing is, so we have oil reserves and we have oil in the United States and other countries too. It's not just the Middle East. So I think broadly speaking, I think we have to, look at that and say, is it really worth staying there and losing all these lives over oil? I think it's a good question. I think my prediction, this is a prediction, is within the next 10 years or so, I think technology is going to keep advancing, and we're seeing more of these smart cars and these solar powered things and this new technology come out. I think that we're going to shift away from fossil fuels, not altogether, but it's going to start shifting away that paradigm. So I think we're going to get in a better position to say, okay, we don't need as much fossil fuel. And I'm not for eliminating fossil fuels entirely, just so you know.
Well, I honestly think we already have the key to free energy. The problem is that these monopolies are buying them all up and, basically say to these new companies starting up that you can't start this, we have the monopoly. And I also think the government is aiding this too, because if we go to free energy, some sort of free energy, then there won't be any money to be made. So I see that you served as a U.S. Coast Guard for 6 years.
Yeah.
For a veteran.
Yep.
So would you recommend a young person to go into the military at this point?
I would. I mean, it depends what you want to do. Each branch of the military, including the Space Force, by the way,
Yeah.
is looking to actively recruit people. And I think they're having trouble finding qualified candidates now. So, you can kind of pick your path. You'll learn a great skill. If you want to work on engines, if you want to work on nuclear things, nuclear submarines, if you want to be more of a infantryman, I think there's a job for anybody. And honestly, it's free training. Well, I guess you get paid for the training, really. And you can come out of it and you can convert those skills you've learned into, the private sector, and you can do well there. It's great. It teaches you responsibility. Every branch, I'm friends with people from every branch of the military, other than Space Force because it's too new.
Yeah.
And we're going to, all these people are great people. They have great experiences, and they love what they did, and they served the country honorably, and God bless them for that. I'm very big on veterans rights, also, just as a side note there. I think we need to make sure the VA stays on track, and I've heard some bad stories coming out of some of the VA hospitals and everything, and I've heard some good stories too. So they're doing good in some aspects, but yeah.
So President Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex, and George Washington in his farewell address warned us also about getting into foreign affairs. So do you believe that Eisenhower and Washington were right?
I do. Now, so if you go all the way back to Washington, at that time, there wasn't too much, I'll just say, foreign affairs going on, right? It was more, there weren't planes, there weren't, trains and all that stuff way back. I guess the trains were kind of getting started, but, it wasn't as much of a global economy, so everything wasn't as connected. And so then you go up to Eisenhower, everything's a little bit more globalized. I think that, it's such a, we have to have international diplomacy, and we have to have a presence in all these different places with our embassies at a minimum, to really keep everything on track. And, in a perfect utopia world, we'd withdraw, every country would withdraw all of its troops and all of its people from all the other countries, and they would just live in their own little individual silos. But I don't think that that's where we're at, just because it's such a the economy is connected globally. And I'll just say real quick, Wuhan, China. Okay, you got Wuhan, China. If they do any manufacturing or anything, and they're sending out their products all around the country, that's a major health concern now, because you have the coronavirus. Before we had the vaccine created, I would be skeptical receiving a package from China right now, and I assume most people would. But that just shows you, like, the world is so connected. You have something happening 10,000 miles away, well, it could spread easily and quickly.
So they did make a vaccine for the coronavirus?
No, so they're currently working on the vaccine. I think the CDC said it's going to be a few months before they really get the virus, the vaccine for the virus
So
generated.
what are your thoughts on vaccinations?
I think that people should have vaccinations. I mean, I've had all the vaccinations. When you go in the military, you do.
Right.
I think it's important. I mean, measles, mumps, rubella, the MMR shot, the basic shots. I think it's important, especially when we have illegal immigrants coming over the border that don't have shots, and then they're spreading measles or whatever it is that they're coming with. It's an important thing. You can't, especially if you're in a city environment, these things can spread. Let's say no one's vaccinated and everyone gets, the coronavirus, for example, or whatever it is. Let's say that was one of the vaccines that was already produced. That's a huge problem. You'd see massive sickness. Hospitals would be overrun. So I'm for vaccination. So
would you support forced vaccinations?
I would not. So what like which type of vaccinations? Anyone in particular, or?
Well, basically like the coronavirus, if it was getting really bad in the United States, would you support forcibly vaccinating people?
I mean, I think that people would volunteer. I don't know what the number of people are that exist in the world that aren't forcibly vaccinated, but I think that everyone should just vaccinate them, have their own vaccinations done. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think about the Virginia governor in blackface and killing babies?
Well, we already touched on this earlier a little bit. I think that the Virginia governor wants to, I think that he started off, and when he was elected, and he meant well, but I think that it just took such a spiral. I think he's just taken such far left positions on abortion and everything that it's really just disgusting. I mean, you can't just kill children. It's crazy to me. I don't understand who would actually take that view and run with it.
And he was really racist too to black people, which I find extremely odd.
Yeah. I mean, he did wear the blackface. He was in his yearbook photo too, which I think is kind of
pretty unbelievable.
Yeah,
So we see this coronavirus. I don't know if you're aware about this, but you know who owns the coronavirus?
No.
So the person who currently owns the coronavirus is Bill Gates. So he purchased all the rights to the coronavirus, the vaccine, and everything. So this is the one thing I majorly fear. Who's going to make money from a big pandemic? I know you may not think that that this is just something that came out of the blue, but it's highly likely that this is a bioweapon. Who's going to make the money off the forced vaccinations or the vaccinations? Well, it's going to be Bill Gates, because he bought that all. So are you going to hold these people accountable?
Well, so I didn't know that. Okay. I don't know how he bought it, but maybe does he own a lab? I guess I'll ask you that first. Does he own a lab to create the vaccine? Is that part of it?
Well, he purchased all the copyrights and everything with the United States. So maybe you could look into it a little bit more, because it's pretty unbelievable. That's the only thing I fear from vaccinations, is that big pharma gives a lot of money to Democrat and Republican candidates, and they're the people who hold the monopoly on vaccinations, including the flu, various others. So that's what.
Well, so if they have a monopoly on something that's like that, that's an emergency vaccine that everyone needs. Let's just say it's the coronavirus vaccine. Yeah, I mean, the government does have the ability to come in and say, look, you're going to generate, you're going to give us the vaccine, and we're going to save all these people's lives. And I think that that's reasonable in that situation because, we can't have it's probably a bioweapon. Okay, this coronavirus is probably a bioweapon. I believe Josh Hawley, one of the senators, he has openly, floated that idea, and I happen to agree with him. Right? I don't think that this is something that's so we're not seeing all the information from China on this. So that alone is a pretty big red flag, and the numbers they're giving us are already bad for the death toll and the number that are infected, but it's only growing. They say it's growing in a linear fashion, but I think it'll be growing in a linear fashion until it grows exponentially. So there's
The,
a yeah.
the only thing that I fear, though, about the government having these vaccinations with the people is, can we really trust the government? Because we did see in Hitler's Germany, he gave these, these injections to the Jewish people, like this is the worst case scenario,
Mm-hmm.
and that killed all the people.
Right.
So can we really trust the government? Because that's really, in my opinion, I know you're for the Constitution and everything. I think the constitutional right is to our bodies. I really don't feel the government should have the right to put a needle in your body if you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what vaccine it is. I know it's kind of a dodgy answer, but I mean, if it's like we said with the coronavirus, if it's the vaccine, it's going to save your life. I think that I don't think anyone's going to be turning down the vaccine, to be quite honest with you. But if it's something where it's some poison, it's been a proven poison. I still don't think the government would force you to take it, and I don't think anyone would take it. And I mean, I wouldn't promote that. If you're in a situation, though, again, coronavirus vaccine, and someone doesn't want to take it and they're going to be contagious or they're already infected, I mean, I guess if they want to die, that's their right. But I don't think anyone would turn it down, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I kind of get where you're coming from and some of that, whatever, but just the thing with the vaccinations, I was hearing that there is do you know about that big depopulation campaign where a lot of rich people are supporting? There's too many people on the planet. And are you aware of that?
I'm aware of it. I don't know much about it, though.
Well, the thing that I fear, especially with this coronavirus that came out of the blue, it could be a Machiavelli plan, though, just looking at it at both ways, that could, okay, we're going to have this big coronavirus. We're going to quarantine everybody. We already see this in China. The Chinese government is putting political dissidents away, with the big Hong Kong protesting and everything. Well, due to this coronavirus epidemic, well, all of that has stopped, and now they're arresting the leaders of it. So I just fear if the United States did make a vaccine for this, it could be faulty and have massive complications later, or it could have complications that they already knew about with a forced vaccination. So just to make it clear, as a Congress member, you would not support forced vaccinations.
No.
Okay. So what will you do to solve the immigration problem?
So there is legal immigration, there's illegal immigration. We need to, I think, start, you can do both simultaneously, but a good starting point would be the illegal immigration at the southern border, and then also people that are overstaying their visas. I think it's incredible that we're, more times than not, it's the people that are overstaying their visas that are getting in trouble than the people that are coming across from the border from South America and everything. And I think that the border wall definitely needs to be constructed. It is a huge financial burden on our country to have all these folks coming over and just being here illegally. They're not paying taxes, they're bringing crime, they're bringing the disease, all that stuff. It's true. These are facts. And we need to definitely finish building the wall because people are demonizing this wall. A lot of countries have walls along their borders. This is not, something novel to the United States. Like, it's not only us that's doing it. We have the right to protect our country as a sovereign nation from people coming in if we don't want them to be here. Okay. And the reason why we have the immigration, checklist of procedures, and, you get a waiting period and it takes a few years to become a citizen, is because we want to make sure that these folks have some of all the vaccines done, the knowledge of the United States, and they want to actually be here and they're not criminals. There's a whole vetting process, right? That's why they do it. And so, it's nice that people want to come to the country, but they have to do it through legal means. I think we need to increase the number of judges at the border as well, because they have too many cases on their docket to process.
So we see a huge problem with human trafficking, especially in Florida. And it almost seems that the government is aiding and abetting in human trafficking. So who do you think is funding all this to make the government on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, support these open border ideas that lead to massive amounts of human trafficking? Who do you think is behind that?
I don't know who's behind it, but it's hard for me to see who would be able to get behind the open borders philosophy. I don't see how that benefits anybody. It's substantially cheaper to build the wall and have more security at the border than it is to have a financial burden over decades and decades and decades of time. The costs are going to only increase. It's something like $100 billion a year in costs for all the illegal folks that are here. So, and if a border wall is 10 billion, let's just call it 10 billion. That's a deal compared to 100 billion a year in cost for these folks. So we need to, get the security thing under control. And
Are you beholden to any special interests, including the Vatican, among other big oil? Because I've just recently seen Nancy Pelosi going on her knees to kiss the Pope's ring. What are you, or are you
Nope.
your own man? Okay.
No, I'm my own man. I have no special interest as far as outside groups go. My only special interest is to the people of Virginia and on the local level, really. I mean, when you think about it, the individuals, because if a special interest group wants to donate money to my campaign, go right ahead. If I believe with them ideologically, if they're a pro-Second Amendment group, for example, excellent. If they're an anti-Second Amendment group, they can still donate to me, but I'm not going to support anti-Second Amendment, laws, any of that stuff. So that probably gives you a pretty good idea of where I stand, right?
So how do you plan to win this election?
Sure. So I've gotten a lot of ground support. A lot of the folks very, very fired up to vote for me. We have a primary convention, and they know that I'm not a political insider. I'm not a Washington establishment person, and they really appreciate that. And they see that and they know that. And that's what people deserve. People deserve to be represented by actual real people with no special interests other than their own personal interests, which is protecting their rights and making sure taxes don't get too high, and all that stuff.
Could you tell everyone where they can find you again?
Sure. My website is robergeforcongress.com, and then the Twitter, which is my main social media thing, is Jason Roberge VA. And if you want to donate, great. Check out my website, add me on, and the website has some good updates on it. That's the easiest place to go to see updates.
Well, I have to thank you for being on the show, and hopefully you can defeat this communist who you're running against.
Absolutely. We need to take back Virginia.
Well, sounds good. Thank you for your time.
Sure. Thank you.